perfect happiness? From the perspective of truth, Shabhava, happiness that is still a sensation, Vedana, or happiness that is dependent on the enjoyment of sense objects, is in fact a form of dukkha, pressure, suffering. This is because pleasurable sensation, sukha vedana, is the same as their forms of sensation, i.e. painful and neutral sensations, dukkha vedana and adukkha sukha vedana. They are all conditioned phenomena, sankara dhamma. All conditioned phenomena are subject to pressure, dukkha. This refers to dukkha in the context of the three characteristics. As illustrated in this discussion between the Buddha and one of the bhikkhus. Bhikkhu: Venerable Sir, while I was alone in seclusion, this reflection arose in my mind thus. The Blessed One has spoken about three kinds of feeling: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, dukkha vedana, neither painful nor pleasant feeling. The Blessed One has also said, whatever sensing vedana of sense objects is classified as dukkha. Now with reference to what was this said by the Blessed One? Buddha: Good, Bhikkhu. I have spoken about three kinds of feeling: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, neither painful nor pleasant feeling. And I have also said, whatever sensing of sense objects is classified as dukkha. That latter clause has been stated by me with reference to the impermanence of formations. That has been stated by me with reference to formations being subject to destruction, subject to dissolution, subject to fading away, subject to cessation, and subject to change. Whenever one truly understands that the three kinds of feeling are impermanent, shaped by causes and conditions, interdependent, and of the nature to decay and cease, and one abandons craving from these feelings, to the extent where the heart is liberated, one is independent of the enjoyment of sense objects. One experiences supreme happiness, which is beyond sensation. Feeling vedana relies on contact, phassa, on cognition, which arises from the coming together of a sense base, ayatana. Example, the eye with a sense object, ramana. Example, a visual form. As a result, there is seeing, hearing, etc. Feeling is dependent on sense objects. Without sense objects, feeling cannot arise. For this reason, feeling vedana can be defined as experiencing sense objects or enjoying the flavor, rasa, of sense stimuli. Therefore, happiness, that is, a sensation, must rely, as does all sensation, on sense objects. The happiness of jhana relies exclusively on mind objects, dhamma ramana. Sense pleasure, however, relies on all kinds of sense objects, in particular on the first five objects, which are material, misa, and referred to as the five strands of sense pleasure, kama guna. Unawakened beings live their lives by searching for sensual happiness, which is tantamount to entrusting their well-being and happiness to external sense objects. Whenever the five objects of sensual enjoyment are abundant, they amuse themselves and are cheerful. Whenever these objects undergo fluctuation and change, or they are in shortage and unacquirable, these people become discouraged and depressed. This is in contrast to those individuals who are familiar with more refined forms of happiness, especially the happiness independent of sensation. They do not entrust their well-being to sense objects. Even if these things change and disappear, still abide in happiness, as confirmed by these words by the Buddha. Devas on humans take pleasure in forms, delight in forms, rejoice in forms, rejoice in sounds, rejoice in scents, rejoice in tastes, rejoice in tactile objects, rejoice in mental phenomena. With the change, fading away, and cessation of forms, sounds, scents, tastes, tactile objects, mental phenomena, devas and humans abide in suffering. But the Tathagata, the Arahant, the fully enlightened one, was understood as they really are: the origin, the instability, the advantages, the dangers, and the escape in the case of forms, sounds, scents, tastes, tactile objects, mental phenomena. And therefore he does not take pleasure in forms, delight in forms, rejoice in forms, rejoice in mental phenomena. With the change, fading away, and cessation of forms, sounds, scents, tastes, tactile objects, mental phenomena, the Tathagata dwells happily. The experience of ordinary unawakened people is limited and confined. They are familiar only with the happiness arising from sense pleasure, and they experience a satisfying degree of pleasurable sensations. They are caught up, infatuated, and bewildered by this pleasure and by the objects of pleasure. When they experience painful sensations, they become downcast or agitated. They yearn for and pin their hopes on the return of sense pleasure, because they know of no other escape from painful feelings apart from sense pleasure. Noble disciples, on the other hand, who are familiar with more refined forms of happiness, are not caught up and enslaved by sense objects when experiencing pleasurable sensations. Likewise, when experiencing painful sensations, they are not dispirited or agitated, nor do they seek out sense pleasure as an escape. This is because they know of a superior escape, Nitsarana, a freedom independent of sense pleasure. They know of a more expansive form of happiness, and they have insight into the true nature of happiness and unhappiness. They know of a happiness free from sensation. It must not always rely on the enjoyment of sense objects. It is difficult for ordinary people to understand this happiness independent of sensation, because they have no experience of it and know nothing comparable to it. Having said this, to get an inkling of it, one can point to a basic form of happiness inherent in people's minds, which is separate from the happiness derived from enjoying sense pleasures. This basic form of happiness is both a happiness in itself and also a support for the enjoyment of sense objects. It can be described as a mental state of clarity and calm, and there is no blemish, disturbance, or lingering anxiety in the mind. It can be called an empty mind, pure mind, or a peaceful mind. A person endowed with such a state of mind can be considered as dwelling in happiness. Moreover, when a person with such a state of mind experiences sense impressions, whether they be sights, sounds, smells, tastes, or tangible objects, he or she experiences the pleasure of this contact to the full. This can be illustrated by looking at the opposite situation. Take, for example, someone eating, whose mind at that time is not calm, who is sad, depressed or beset by some other form of distress. Even if the food is delicious and of the kind that he normally enjoys, on this occasion he may not find it delicious. He may have to force himself to eat, or he may not be able to swallow the food at all. If, however, his mind is cheerful, he will savour the flavour of the food fully. Even if the food is not the best, he may find it delicious. Another example is someone whose body is dirty, grimy, sweaty, or itchy. Even if she sits and listens to music, she won't feel at ease. Or if she tries to do some detailed work, she won't be very effective. But if she takes a shower and cleans her body, she will feel at ease. She will derive the greatest amount of pleasure from sense contact and be able to complete meticulous kinds of work. Persons endowed with such internal or basic happiness are also able to enjoy the external happiness derived from sense objects. Besides benefiting from both kinds of happiness, internal and external, their mental capabilities are also enhanced. On the contrary, those people who are deprived of this internal happiness lose out on both counts, both in terms of internal and external happiness. Moreover, their mental capabilities are also compromised. It is possible to cultivate this basic form of happiness and to make it more pure, prominent, and profound than most people are familiar with. One can get a sense of the happiness of Nibbana by way of this comparison. In some, Nibbana is both a form of happiness itself, and it enhances one's ability to experience happiness. When people relate properly to sensuality, reduce their infatuation with pleasurable sense objects, no longer entrust their happiness to these objects, and stop indulging in sense pleasure, they are prepared to experience the refined happiness of jhana. When they have experienced the happiness of jhana and yet still wish to enjoy sense pleasure, they do so in a way characterized as natural and gentle. Generally speaking, they won't perform unwholesome deeds for the sake of obtaining sense pleasure, because they see greater value in the happiness of jhana. In addition, the happiness of jhana relies on a basis of spiritual virtue. When one experiences the happiness of jhana, the mind becomes absorbed in the refined meditative object associated with jhana, of which there are many levels of gradually increasing profundity. At the final stage, it is as if one disappears into this state of extreme subtlety. This can be compared to what people describe as mystical states. These are supreme meditative attainments which are difficult to reach. Someone who is able to relinquish the attachment to this extremely refined state of absorption in these meditative attainments, who is both uprooted an attachment to sense pleasure and to attachment to jhana, who has indeed relinquished an attachment to all things, reaches perfect liberation, Nibbana. Nibbana is the opposite of these aforementioned conditions, whether it be sense pleasure or meditative attainment, jhana samapatti. This is because the state of sense enjoyment and the state of jhana both require an engagement for sense objects, holding on to sense objects, merging with sense objects. One is entrusting oneself and subject to sense objects. Nibbana, on the other hand, is a state of detachment, liberation, and freedom. Although Nibbana stands in a direct contrast to these other states, A person who realizes Nibbana is fully prepared to enjoy all levels of happiness, including sense pleasure and the happiness of jhana. They can also they can enjoy happiness in the most optimum way, without any danger or harm. To sum up, those people who realize Nibbana, besides experiencing the happiness of Nibbana itself, are able to enjoy all the preceding kinds of happiness, and to savor the enjoyment of these to the fullest. Those who realize Nibbana but did not previously pass through the various stages of concentrative attainment are not qualified to experience some of these attainments. They have still reached Nibbana and experienced the supreme happiness of liberation, Vimukti Sukha. There exists no greater happiness than the happiness of liberation. When one abandons sense pleasure, one is entitled to the happiness of jhana. When one abandons the happiness of jhana, one is entitled to the happiness of Nibbana and the happiness of liberation, which is secure, peaceful, and bright, and one is able to return to enjoy all the previous kinds of happiness. The fact that awakened beings renounce sexual intercourse and abandon or disengage from concentrative attainments, jhana samapatti, enables them to reach superior forms of spiritual attainment, samapatti. In order to reach the freedom of Nibbana, one must first relinquish everything, including the bliss of jhana. By relinquishing everything, one obtains all.